The Danish People's Party reports Copenhagen's Green-led council is limiting elderly care residents to 80 grams of beef per week for climate reasons. Nursing home residents in Copenhagen Municipality are allowed to eat only 11.4 grams of meat per day to avoid exceeding the weekly limit of 80 grams.
I would love to talk about this story out of Copenhagen because and this is pretty much par for the course as far as these ridiculous just policies involving how to protect the climate, eat less meat, eat less this, do less that, so on. But the thing that stood out to me the most from this story is that phrase, climate sinners. And I think perhaps even on this show, you and I have talked about how it really has become a religion, this attitude towards the climate and towards environmentalism. And we've seen it in the church. We've seen these allegations that it's a sin to be to disrespect the environment, to ignore the climate issues, that sort of thing. We've seen that kind of language before, and here it is in the secular media being used entirely unironically, that the elderly have been the biggest climate sinners throughout their lives, which is basically they've been on Earth the longest, so they are the guiltiest of these sins of pollution and whatever, and so they have to suffer by being limited to 11.4 grams of meat a day. As this tweet
I had trouble visualizing that, but there's a picture of how much meat that is.
Yes,
and it's like, I don't know, like a quarter. If it was a sphere, that's how big this meat piece is. So in other words, you're basically banned from eating meat, effectively speaking. If you're one of the elderly in this area, it's the climate activist dream of really demoting mankind. Right? You're really demoting mankind below the animal kingdom, below nature, which they tend to give godlike names to. I don't know if you've noticed, but those who are engaged in so-called climate activism the most virulently are those who seem to have this sort of new age religion as well, because you mentioned this sort of religious terminology, and I think sometimes it becomes really explicit, because these are the people who are like talking about Gaia and stuff, this so-called goddess, and doing so in a way that presumes some kind of consciousness of nature. When they say Mother Earth, they don't really mean it as just a phrase meaning nature. And that's really kind of interesting, because there are a bunch of like old religions, like different pagan religions that kind of speak to this understanding of nature or different elements of nature, trees and so on, as being godlike. And so you kind of see that even in like early England with the Druids and so on. You had some of this there. You have various things in like Wicca and various witchcraft-based, I don't know if you want to call them religions, but I guess we should. That it's all about these like false gods that are inside of nature, or even a leading goddess is a huge theme there. And so if you have this sort of understanding like that, then it becomes, well, you can't kill the cow, and you can't eat a steak, because then somehow you're killing your better. And so it really becomes this weird combination of scientism, as you try and play with climate science, that merges with these old religions as you try and herald some goddess. So you're absolutely right there, Jake, with the religiosity that's going on. We're really getting pretty deep into this stuff. And so at the same time, it's the elderly, though, that have, in this situation, who are the first to suffer and who have very little voice and very little rights yet, because they're just nursing home residents. Yeah, I know it's often popular, especially among people of our generation or younger, to just blame the boomers for the environmentalism issue, blame the hippies or something like that. But here it's the elderly who are being targeted by this. They're the ones who are getting blamed. You've been on Earth the longest, so you've accumulated the most sins against our Earth goddess here, against this climate that we worship. And the thing is, it's not even like you could make a good argument for rationing in times of actual shortage. When you're dealing with a war, for example, you could. I mean, some countries have to deal with that all the time. When you have these shortages, rations. But this is an issue of carbon emissions and that sort of thing. Which again, and we can't get into all the nitty gritty of the science here. But the science, if you actually study it and you don't just read these cherry picked studies, the science is not even on the side of this sort of thing.
These animals are part of this entire cycle that's built to deal with things like CO2. Carbon dioxide, it's just what you breathe out. It's not an issue. It's something that trees happily take in and need to grow. And then when these plants take it in, the animals eat the plants, the animals become food for us. It's part of a cycle that is not.
It's almost like there's an intelligent design behind it all.
Yes, it's almost like it's a system that works really well when you don't meddle with it. And I do want to say, and this is hopefully this won't tick off too many people. I am actually very much in favor of protecting the environment. I care about the environment a lot. I do not want all our forests torn down so you can put up, AI data centers. But the issue is that the environmentalist movement, as it has been co-opted entirely by the left in most ways, it doesn't even protect the environment. It believes in installing these vast fields of solar panels that fry the birds and take up land. Don't get me started on wind turbines. You'll get a whole Don Quixote moment because I absolutely despise wind turbines. I cannot stand seeing them. They throw me into an almost embarrassing amount of rage when I see them because they are ugly and they kill birds and bats and they disturb people with their hums. They are horrible, horrible creations. And this attitude of trying to save the environment with these policies is entirely, it's not based in reason. It's not based on actual real science. It's not based on actual real facts. It's entirely based on what feels good, what we've been told feels good, oftentimes by big companies that profit greatly off of subsidies to install these solar farms and these wind turbine farms and things. And it doesn't actually help the environment. It doesn't actually help the earth.
Right.
And it doesn't protect
the conservation.
Yes, indeed. Conservation and the true protection of the environment is a conservative point of view. You're trying to conserve the goodness of God's creation that is there. And that's why I don't even freak out all the time when the church talks about this whole stewardship thing of the earth, because it is good. We are supposed to be that way. It can be done correctly. That's just when it gets co-opted by leftist ideology, that's when it goes haywire. And we've seen it in the church, and we are clearly seeing it here in Europe in really embarrassing degrees.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and that's the issue is whenever someone says that they're like a climate, like I would never call myself a climate activist. I'm glad that, we have areas in which they're not entirely industrialized. I don't want to turn everything into concrete. I don't want to live in the Soviet Union. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's the trouble is this sort of conflating of one thing with another. And it's the same way you wouldn't call yourself an anti-fascist, most likely, even if you're opposed to fascism.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you don't want to be associated with that movement.
Nope.
And the darkest side of the climate activism comes really when you end up wanting to eliminate people because they use too much oxygen. It sounds like a really excessive statement.
Yeah.
And yet it's what some of these people have actually argued in favor of, well, you get to a certain age, we should just kind of end you because your help to harm ratio is looking kind of bad. And it's horrendous. And that's the thing. And how far away are you from that when you're restricting the meat to the elderly? I don't think you're that far away. This is a population that specifically struggles from undernourishment already, who are the weakest population. So you want to argue that you want to change their diets on the basis of what we're doing to cows and on the basis of the climate. Well, what are we doing other than putting a sort of preferentialism on the climate above humanity? And at that point, there is no limit to where you would go. And that's why you have some of the most extreme climate activists who want to reduce the population of the world, because it's the logical extension of what's already being practiced by these people over there in Copenhagen. Absolutely. These things, they go together, and you have to really understand a person's psychology and what they're thinking by taking their arguments, understanding their logic, and then extending it to where it would go. And then you really understand the dangers that they're within.
Yeah, you understand the lack of real logic because the logic just ends in absurdity. And that's a way of arguing. You take the reduction to the absurd, and you realize just how ridiculous the argument is.